The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered against the concrete garage floor as I heard my wife Alicia's voice drift through the open kitchen window above me. "He's too busy for me. He doesn't even notice the money's gone." I froze beneath the hood of my mother's old Buick, every muscle in my body tensing like a coiled spring. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across our driveway in this quiet New England neighborhood, where Victorian houses stood like weathered sentinels watching over secrets that festered behind lace curtains. "Greg's completely oblivious," Alicia continued, her voice carrying that familiar tone of superiority that had been grating on my nerves for months. "Yesterday I transferred another $5,000 from his account to fund the prototype. He just sits there managing that pathetic little restaurant, thinking he's some kind of business genius." My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth might crack. $5,000. That explained why my checking account looked like a barren wasteland lately. I'd been chalking it up to the usual expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, but apparently my loving wife had been treating my life savings like her personal ATM. "Are you sure he won't find out?" The second voice belonged to Susie, Alicia's best friend since college. Susie Martinez, the woman who'd been practically living in our house for the past 3 months, ostensibly helping Alicia launch her tech startup. The same woman who always seemed to have an opinion about everything I did wrong as a husband. "Trust me, Greg's not that smart," Alicia laughed, and the sound cut through me like broken glass. "Besides, once my app takes off, I'll pay him back with interest. He should be thanking me for having the vision he lacks." I wiped my hands on an old rag, my mind racing. 22 years of marriage, and this is what it had come to. My wife stealing from me while discussing my alleged stupidity with her manipulative best friend? The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, fixing my dead mother's car, while my very much alive wife was busy dismantling our financial future. The kitchen window slammed shut, cutting off their conversation. I stared at the peeling paint on the garage wall, feeling something cold and calculating settle in my chest. Alicia thought I was oblivious. She was about to learn just how wrong she could be. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, pretending to read the local newspaper, while Alicia bustled around preparing dinner. She moved with the confident grace of someone who believed she held all the cards, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her yoga-toned body showcased in expensive athletic wear that I now realized I'd unknowingly purchased. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, not looking up from the stove where she was preparing some organic, gluten-free monstrosity that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "Oh, the usual," I replied, keeping my voice deliberately casual. "Managed the restaurant, counted money, tried not to be too stupid about basic mathematics." She glanced over her shoulder, and for just a moment, I caught something flickering in her green eyes. Guilt? Fear? Or maybe just annoyance that I'd interrupted her mental planning of my financial demise. "That's nice, dear," she said, turning back to her cooking. "By the way, I need you to sign some papers tomorrow. Just routine stuff for the business." "What kind of papers?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Nothing major, just some loan documents. The bank needs your signature as my spouse." She said it so smoothly, so casually, that I almost admired her technique. Almost. I folded the newspaper and stood up, walking over to where she stood at the stove. She tensed slightly as I approached, but didn't move away when I placed my hands on her shoulders. "Alicia," I said softly, "we need to talk about something." "What about?" Her voice had that carefully controlled tone that meant she was preparing for battle. About the $5,000 you transferred from my account yesterday." The wooden spoon she'd been stirring with clattered into the pot. She spun around to face me, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine surprise. Apparently, she hadn't expected me to notice quite so quickly. I can explain," she stammered, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm sure you can. You always have an explanation, don't you? Just like you had an explanation for why you needed access to my accounts in the first place. For emergencies, you said? For our future together?" Her face flushed red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "It is for our future, Greg. My startup is going to make us rich. I'm investing in us. You're investing my money without my permission. There's a word for that, and it's not investing." "Don't be so dramatic," she snapped, her mask finally slipping. "It's not like we don't share everything. What's yours is mine, right? Isn't that what marriage means?" I stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in years. The woman I'd fallen in love with in college had been ambitious, yes, but also warm and caring. This person standing before me was a stranger wearing my wife's face. "You're right," I said finally. "Marriage is about sharing. So let me share something with you. I know about the other transfers, too. The $3,000 last month. The $1,500 the month before that. I know about the credit cards you opened in my name." Her face went pale, and I knew I'd hit the target dead center. And here's something else I'd like to share, I continued, my voice growing colder with each word. I'm not nearly as stupid as you think I am. In fact, I'm smart enough to know that what you're doing is called fraud. I'm also smart enough to know that you've been planning this for months, probably with Susie's help. You don't understand, she began, but I cut her off. Oh, I understand perfectly. What I don't understand is why you thought you could get away with it. The kitchen fell silent except for the bubbling of whatever organic disaster she'd been preparing. We stared at each other across the space that had once felt like home and now felt like a battlefield. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Now? Now we see just how smart I really am. The next morning, I called in sick to the restaurant, something I hadn't done in over 5 years. Instead of heading to work, I drove to the office of my lawyer, Harold Ford, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who'd handled my mother's estate and various business matters over the years. Greg, Harold said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary ushered me into his office, this is unexpected. What brings you here so early? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd prepared the night before. I need to know exactly what legal protections I have regarding my assets, and I need to know if my wife can access certain accounts without my explicit permission. Harold's eyebrows rose slightly, but he maintained his professional composure. I see. Are we talking about marital assets or separate property? Both. Specifically, I want to know about the house, my mother's estate, and the restaurant. For the next hour, Harold walked me through the legal maze of marriage, property rights, and financial protection. The news was better than I'd hoped and worse than I'd feared. The good news, Harold explained, is that your mother's house is held in an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. Your wife has no legal claim to it whatsoever. The restaurant is also protected since it was established before your marriage and is held in a separate business entity. And the bad news? The bad news is that most of your other assets, checking accounts, savings, credit cards, are considered marital property. If your wife has been making unauthorized transfers, it's certainly grounds for divorce, but proving theft in a marriage is complicated. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. What if I told you she's been forging my signature on loan documents? Harold's expression grew serious. That would be fraud, regardless of marital status. Do you have evidence? I opened my folder and pulled out several documents I'd retrieved from Alicia's home office while she'd been at her morning yoga class. Bank statements, loan applications, and most damning of all, practice sheets where she'd been perfecting my signature. Harold examined the papers with the intensity of a detective studying crime scene evidence. This is extensive, he said finally. Greg, your wife has been systematically accessing and manipulating your finances for months. This isn't impulsive behavior, this is premeditated financial abuse. The words hit me like a physical blow. Financial abuse. I'd never thought of it in those terms, but hearing Harold say it out loud made the reality undeniable. What are my options? I asked. Several. We can freeze the accounts, file for divorce on grounds of fraud, and pursue criminal charges if you want to go that route. But first, I'd recommend gathering more evidence. The more documentation we have, the stronger your position will be. I left Harold's office with a clear mission and a burning sense of purpose. If Alicia wanted to play games with my money, I'd show her what a real game looked like. That afternoon, I drove to Alicia's startup office, a trendy co-working space in the gentrified part of downtown where young entrepreneurs sipped overpriced coffee and pitched revolutionary ideas that would mostly fail within 2 years. I found Alicia in a glass-walled conference room, animatedly discussing something with Susie and a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, muscular, with the kind of rugged good looks that belonged on a construction site rather than in a tech startup. When he laughed at something Alicia said, she placed her hand on his arm in a way that made my stomach clench. I watched them through the glass for several minutes, noting the body language, the intimate glances, the way Alicia kept touching the stranger while Susie looked on with obvious approval. The pieces of a larger puzzle were starting to fall into place. Can I help you? A young receptionist with purple hair and multiple piercings had approached me. I'm looking for my wife, Alicia Thompson, I said, pointing toward the conference room. Oh, you're Greg, she said with a kind of enthusiasm that immediately put me on guard. Alicia talks about you all the time. She's in a meeting with Dominic right now, but I'm sure she'll be done soon. Dominic. So the muscle-bound stranger had a name. What does Dominic do here? I asked casually. He's Alicia's business partner. They're working on some amazing fitness app together. It's going to revolutionize how people work out. Business partner. Right. I thanked the receptionist and left before Alicia could spot me, but not before I'd gotten a clear photo of Dominic through the glass wall. That evening, I confronted Alicia again, this time with more specific questions. "How's the business going?" I asked over dinner. "Really well," she said, avoiding eye contact. "We're making great progress on the prototype." "We?" "Susie and I, of course." "What about Dominic?" The fork in her hand froze halfway to her mouth. "Who?" "Dominic, your business partner. The one you were meeting with today at the co-working space." She set down her fork and looked directly at me for the first time all evening. "Have you been spying on me?" "I've been trying to understand what my money is being used for." Imagine my surprise when I discovered my wife has a business partner she's never mentioned. "Dominic is just a consultant," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "He helps with the fitness aspects of the app." "I see. And does this consulting happen to include touching your arm and making you giggle like a teenager?" Her face flushed red. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" Because from where I was standing, it looked less like a business meeting and more like a date. "You're paranoid, Greg. Just because you're insecure doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong." But her defensive tone told me everything I needed to know. My wife wasn't just stealing my money, she was cheating on me with her business partner, and Susie was apparently helping orchestrate the whole thing. That night, after Alicia had gone to bed, I sat in my home office and began planning my next move. If my wife wanted to play dirty, I'd show her just how dirty the game could get. I started by researching Dominic Pierce, a name I'd gotten from the co-working space directory. What I found was illuminating. Dominic was a personal trainer at a local gym, divorced, with a history of short-term relationships with married women. He'd been sued twice for unpaid debts and had a reputation for using women to fund his lifestyle. Perfect. My wife had fallen for a professional con artist. I spent the next week gathering evidence. I followed them to restaurants, hotels, and the gym where Dominic worked. I documented every meeting, every intimate moment, every lie Alicia told me about her whereabouts. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Richard Martinez, my longtime friend and neighbor, called me on a Friday evening. "Greg, I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it," he said without preamble. "What is it?" "I saw Alicia and some guy at the Riverside Motel yesterday afternoon. They weren't discussing business, if you know what I mean." My hands clenched around the phone. The Riverside Motel was a seedy place on the outskirts of town, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "Greg, I'm sorry. I know this has to be killing you." "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded, "it's not killing me at all. It's liberating me, because now I had everything I needed to destroy them both." The following Monday, I put my plan into motion. First, I called Harold and told him to freeze all joint accounts and credit cards. Then I drove to the restaurant and called a staff meeting. "I need to take some time off for personal reasons," I announced to my team of 6 servers and 2 cooks. "Maria will be acting manager while I'm gone." Maria Rodriguez, my assistant manager for the past 3 years, nodded seriously. "How long will you be out, boss?" "A few weeks, maybe longer. I'll be in touch." Next, I drove to the gym where Dominic worked. The Iron House was exactly what you'd expect, a testosterone-fueled temple of weights and mirrors where men went to feel powerful and women went to feel desired. Dominic was easy to spot, standing near the free weights in a tank top that showed off his considerable muscles while he flirted with a blonde woman in yoga pants. I approached the front desk where a young man with arms like tree trunks was reading a bodybuilding magazine. "I'm interested in personal training," I told him. "I heard Dominic Pierce is good." "Dom's the best," the kid said enthusiastically. "Want me to set up a consultation?" "Actually, I'd prefer to watch him work with a client first, if that's okay. Get a sense of his style." The kid shrugged. "Sure, he's with Mrs. Patterson right now. You can watch from over there." I positioned myself where I could observe Dominic without being noticed. He was working with an older woman, probably in her 60s, guiding her through some basic exercises. What struck me immediately was how professional he was. Encouraging, patient, focused entirely on proper form and safety. This wasn't the predatory con artist I'd expected. This was a competent trainer doing his job well. The realization made me pause. Maybe I'd misjudged the situation. Maybe Dominic wasn't the villain in this story. But then I saw Alicia walk in. She moved through the gym like she owned it, dressed in expensive workout gear that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. Dominic's entire demeanor changed the moment he spotted her. The professional trainer disappeared, replaced by a man who looked like he was about to devour his prey. They embraced near the cardio equipment, and even from across the room, I could see the intimacy in their body language. This wasn't a business relationship, or even a casual affair. These two people were deeply involved with each other. I watched them for 20 minutes, documenting their interaction with my phone's camera. They worked out together, but spent more time talking and touching than actually exercising. At one point, Dominic pulled her into an alcove near the locker rooms, and they kissed with the passion of teenagers. My wife of 22 years was kissing another man in public, using my money to pay for the gym membership that allowed her to do it. I left before they could notice me, but I'd seen enough. The affair was real, it was serious, and it was about to become very expensive for both of them. That evening, Alicia came home later than usual, claiming she'd been working late at the office. She showered immediately, always a telltale sign, and was unusually affectionate during dinner. "I've been thinking," she said as we cleaned up the dishes. "Maybe we should take a vacation. Get away somewhere nice, just the two of us." "That sounds expensive," I said carefully. "Don't worry about money. The business is doing really well. I can afford to treat my husband." The audacity was breathtaking. She was planning to use my stolen money to take me on a vacation, probably to assuage her guilt about cheating on me with my stolen money. "Where were you thinking?" I asked. "Maybe the Caribbean? Or Europe? Somewhere romantic." "Romantic," I repeated. "Like the Riverside Motel?" She froze, a plate halfway to the dishwasher. "What?" "Richard saw you there yesterday with your business partner." The plate slipped from her hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. For a moment, we both stared at the broken pieces, and I couldn't help thinking it was a perfect metaphor for our marriage. "Greg, I can explain." "No," I said quietly. "You can't." "There's no explanation that makes this okay. You've been stealing from me, lying to me, and cheating on me. The only question now is what we're going to do about it." She began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration at being caught. "It's not what you think," she sobbed. "Dominic and I, we're not... It's complicated." "It's really not complicated at all," I said. "You're having an affair with a personal trainer and using my money to fund your new lifestyle. It's actually quite simple. You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she said, her tears turning to anger. "You're never here. You don't support my dreams. You don't even try to understand what I'm going through. So you decided to steal from me and cheat on me. That makes perfect sense. I was going to pay you back. With what money? Your app that doesn't exist? Your business that's actually just an excuse to spend time with your boyfriend?" She stared at me with a mixture of hatred and fear. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm going to give you exactly what you deserve." The next morning, Alicia discovered that all of our joint accounts had been frozen. She stormed into the kitchen where I was calmly eating breakfast and reading the newspaper. "You bastard!" she screamed. "How am I supposed to live? How am I supposed to pay for anything?" "I suggest you ask your business partner," I said without looking up from the sports section. "I'm sure a successful personal trainer can afford to support his girlfriend." "This is financial abuse?" I looked at her then, and she took a step back at whatever she saw in my eyes. "No," I said softly. "Financial abuse is what you've been doing to me for months. This is called consequences." She tried a different approach, sitting down across from me and reaching for my hand. "Greg, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes, but I love you. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." "Do you love me?" I asked. "Of course I do." "Then end it with Dominic. Right now. Call him and tell him it's over." She pulled her hand back as if I'd burned her. I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because..." She struggled for words, and in that struggle I saw the truth. She didn't love me. She probably hadn't loved me for years. I was just the steady, reliable source of income that allowed her to pursue her fantasies. "Because you love him," I finished for her. She didn't deny it. "Then we have nothing left to discuss," I said, returning to my newspaper. "My lawyer will be in touch about divorce proceedings." "Greg, wait. Get out of my house," I said without looking up. "This is my house too." "Actually, it's not. This house belonged to my mother, and it's held in a trust that you have no claim to. You have until tonight to pack your things and leave." She stared at me in shock. "You can't just throw me out." "Watch me." That evening, I came home to find Alicia's belongings gone and a note on the kitchen counter. It was short and bitter. "You'll regret this. I'll take you for everything you're worth." I crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash. She was welcome to try. But she was about to learn that I was much better at this game than she'd ever imagined. The war was just beginning. 2 weeks after Alicia moved out, I received an unexpected visitor at the restaurant. I was in my office reviewing inventory reports when Maria knocked on my door. "Boss, there's a guy here to see you. Says his name is Dominic." I looked up from my paperwork, genuinely surprised. "Send him back." Dominic Pierce filled my office doorway like a mountain of muscle and misplaced confidence. He was even more imposing up close, 6'3", probably 230 pounds of gym-sculpted intimidation. But what struck me most was the uncertainty in his eyes. This wasn't a man coming to gloat about stealing my wife. This was a man who was scared. "We need to talk," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk without being invited. "I'm listening." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to being in the position of supplicant. Look, I know you hate me, and I get it. But Alicia's in trouble, and I think you're the only one who can help her." I leaned back in my chair, genuinely curious about where this was going. What kind of trouble? Financial trouble. Bad financial trouble. She owes money to some people who don't take no for an answer. What people? Dominic ran a hand through his hair, and I noticed his knuckles were bruised. Loan sharks. She borrowed money to fund her business, and now they want it back with interest. A lot of interest. The pieces started falling into place. How much money? 50,000, maybe more. She wasn't exactly clear on the details. I whistled low. $50,000 was serious money, especially to the kind of people who broke kneecaps when payments were late. And you're telling me this because she said you'd help her. She said you still loved her and wouldn't let anything bad happen to her. I stared at him for a long moment. Did she also tell you that she stole over $20,000 from me to fund this business venture? His face went pale. She said it was her money. From her savings. She doesn't have any savings. Everything she spent came from my accounts, without my knowledge or permission. Dominic slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. Jesus, she told me you were being unreasonable about supporting her dreams. What else did she tell you? That you were controlling and emotionally abusive. That you never supported her ambitions and tried to keep her dependent on you. I nodded slowly. It was a familiar story. The cheating spouse who rewrote history to justify their behavior. And you believed her? She was very convincing. He looked up at me with something that might have been respect. I'm starting to think I was played. You think? He was quiet for a moment, processing this new information. These guys she owes money to, they're not going to care about our relationship drama. They just want their money. That's her problem, not mine. Actually, it might be your problem, too. Dominic leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. She told them you were good for the money. She used your restaurant as collateral. My blood turned to ice water. She what? She told them her husband owned a successful restaurant and would cover her debts if necessary. They think you're on the hook for the $50,000. I stood up so quickly my chair rolled backward and hit the wall. She had no authority to use my business as collateral for anything. Try explaining that to Tony Marconi. The name hit me like a physical blow. Tony Marconi was a local legend, a small-time crime boss who ran numbers, loaned money, and occasionally made people disappear when they couldn't pay their debts. He was old-school Italian mob, the kind of man who viewed violence as a business expense. When are they expecting payment? I asked. End of the week. 3 days. I had 3 days to figure out how to keep my business, and possibly my life, from being destroyed by my ex-wife's stupidity. Where is she now? Staying at a motel across town. She's scared to go anywhere else. I walked to my office window and stared out at the parking lot where normal people were living normal lives, blissfully unaware that my world was collapsing around me. Why are you telling me this? I asked without turning around. Because I'm not a bad guy, despite what you might think. I got involved with a married woman, which was wrong, but I didn't know I was getting involved with a criminal. So you're just going to walk away? What choice do I have? I don't have $50,000, and even if I did, I'm not sure she's worth it. I turned to face him. You love her. I thought I did. But love based on lies isn't really love, is it? It was the most insightful thing he'd said since walking into my office. No, it's not. So what are you going to do? I sat back down and pulled out my phone. I'm going to call my lawyer. Then I'm going to call Tony Marconi. And then I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my ex-wife. Dominic stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About everything. Dominic? Yeah? If you ever come near my wife again, I'll kill you myself. Tony Marconi won't have to bother. He nodded and left without another word. An hour later, I was sitting across from Harold Ford in his office, explaining the latest development in my marital disaster. This is serious, Greg, Harold said after I'd finished. If Alicia represented to these people that you were guaranteeing her debt, you could be in real legal jeopardy. But I never signed anything. I never agreed to anything. That may not matter to Tony Marconi. He's not exactly concerned with legal technicalities. So what are my options? Harold leaned back in his chair, thinking. We could go to the police, but they're unlikely to act quickly enough to help you. We could try to negotiate with Marconi directly, but that's dangerous. Or ... quote. Or what? Or we could turn the tables on Alicia. Make her face the consequences of her actions. I'm listening. What if we arrange a meeting with all parties involved? You, Alicia, Marconi, maybe even Dominic. Put everything on the table and let Alicia explain to these people how she misrepresented your involvement. It was risky, but it might work. Set it up. That evening, I drove to the motel where Alicia was staying. It was a rundown place called the Sunset Inn, the kind of establishment where the neon sign flickered and the parking lot was full of cars that had seen better decades. I found her in room 237, and she looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was unwashed and stringy, her designer clothes had been replaced with a wrinkled t-shirt and jeans, and her eyes were red from crying. "Greg," she said when she opened the door. "Thank God you're here. We need to talk." She stepped aside to let me in. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation. "Did Dominic tell you about the money? He told me you used my restaurant as collateral for a loan from Tony Marconi. Is that true?" She couldn't meet my eyes. I was desperate. The business was failing, and these investors were demanding their money back. I didn't know what else to do. "So you decided to risk my livelihood without asking me? I thought I could pay it back before you found out." "With what money, Alicia? Your imaginary profits from your non-existent business?" She began crying again, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no desire to comfort her, no residual love for the woman I'd once planned to spend my life with. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry for everything. I know I messed up, but please don't let them hurt me." "Here's what's going to happen," I said calmly. "Tomorrow we're going to meet with Tony Marconi, and you're going to explain that you had no authority to use my business as collateral. You're going to tell him that I'm not responsible for your debts. He'll kill me. Maybe. But that's the choice you made when you decided to play with other people's money." She stared at me in horror. "You've changed. You're not the man I married." "You're right. The man you married was naive enough to trust you. That man is gone." I headed for the door, then stopped. "Oh, one more thing. If you ever use my name or my business in any financial transaction again, I'll make sure you go to prison for fraud. Are we clear?" She nodded, still crying. "Good. Be at Harold Ford's office tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Don't be late." The next day would determine whether I could salvage my life from the wreckage of my marriage, or whether I'd become another casualty of Alicia's selfishness. Either way, the reckoning was finally at hand. The meeting took place in the conference room of Harold's law office at exactly 2 o'clock on a gray Thursday afternoon. The participants read like a cast from a crime drama. Harold in his expensive suit, me in my best restaurant manager attire, Alicia looking like she hadn't slept in days, Dominic uncomfortable in clothes that were too formal for his gym rat, Lifestyle, and Tony Marconi. Tony was not what I'd expected. Instead of the stereotypical mob boss from movies, he was a small, neat man in his 60s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and gold-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a retired accountant than a loan shark, but the two large men flanking him left no doubt about his true profession. "Mr. Thompson," Tony said, extending a manicured hand, "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me." His voice was cultured, almost professorial. This was somehow more terrifying than if he'd been a crude thug. "Mr. Marconi," I replied, shaking his hand, "I understand we have a situation to resolve." "Indeed we do." Tony took a seat at the head of the conference table, his bodyguards positioning themselves by the door. "Your wife owes me a considerable sum of money, and I was led to believe you would guarantee her debt." "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," Harold interjected. My client never agreed to guarantee any debt, nor did he authorize his wife to use his business as collateral." Tony's eyes shifted to Alicia, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Mrs. Thompson, would you care to explain this discrepancy?" Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. I thought Greg would help me. We were still married when I took the loan." "But you didn't actually ask him, did you?" Tony's tone remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "No." "And you didn't have any legal authority to pledge his assets?" "No." Tony nodded slowly, then turned back to me. "Mr. Thompson, I'm a reasonable man. I understand that sometimes wives make promises their husbands can't keep, but the fact remains that money was loaned in good faith based on representations about your financial backing." "Representations that were false," Harold said firmly. "Perhaps, but from my perspective, I'm out $50,000, and I need to recover that money somehow." The room fell silent. This was the moment of truth. Would Tony accept that I wasn't responsible for Alicia's debts, or would he decide to make me pay anyway? I have a proposal, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. Tony raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. My wife defrauded both of us. She stole money from me to start a business that never existed, and she borrowed money from you under false pretenses. What if we work together to recover what we're both owed? What did you have in mind? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared the night before. Alicia has been living a lifestyle she couldn't afford, funded by stolen money. She has jewelry, designer clothes, expensive electronics, and a car that's worth more than most people's annual salary. If we liquidate everything she bought with fraudulent funds, we might be able to recover a significant portion of what she owes both of us. Tony examined the inventory I'd prepared, his expression thoughtful. This is comprehensive. I had a lot of time to think while she was spending my money. And what about the shortfall? This might cover $30,000, but I'm still out $20,000 plus interest. I looked directly at Alicia. She'll have to get a job and make payments. Real payments, with real money she actually earns. I don't have any job skills, Alicia protested. I've never worked in the service industry. Then you'll learn, I said coldly, the same way millions of other people do. Tony was quiet for several minutes, considering the proposal. Finally, he spoke. Mr. Thompson, I like your thinking. It's creative, it's fair, and it holds the right person responsible. He turned to Alicia. Mrs. Thompson, you have 48 hours to turn over all assets purchased with fraudulent funds. After that, you'll make monthly payments of $1,000 until your debt is satisfied. I can't afford $1,000 a month, Alicia cried. Then you'll get a second job, Tony replied matter-of-factly. Or a third job. That's not my problem. He stood to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mrs. Thompson, if you miss a payment or try to run, my associates will find you. And they won't be as reasonable as I am. After Tony and his men left, the room felt like a deflated balloon. Alicia sat slumped in her chair, finally understanding the full consequences of her actions. I need a drink, Dominic said, breaking the silence. You need to stay away from married women, I replied. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Yeah, I'm learning that lesson the hard way. Harold began packing up his papers. Well, that went better than expected. Tony could have demanded you pay the full amount regardless of your involvement. What happens now? Alicia asked. Now you face the consequences of your choices, I said. You'll liquidate your assets, get a job, and spend the next few years paying back the money you stole and borrowed. What about us? What about our marriage? I stared at her in disbelief. Our marriage ended the moment you decided to steal from me and cheat on me. The divorce papers will be filed tomorrow. But I love you. No, you don't. You love the security I provided and the money I earned. That's not the same thing as love. I stood to leave, then turned back one final time. Alicia, I want you to understand something. I could have let Tony Marconi handle this his way. I could have let you face the consequences alone. But despite everything you've done to me, I helped you today. Not because I love you, but because it was the right thing to do. Greg, don't. We're done. After today, the only communication between us will be through lawyers. I walked out of that conference room and felt 20 years of marriage fall away like a discarded coat. It should have been devastating, but instead, I felt lighter than I had in months. 3 months later, I was sitting in my restaurant office when Maria knocked on my door. Boss, there's a woman here asking about a job. Says she has experience in customer service. I looked up from my paperwork. Send her in. The woman who entered was thin, tired-looking, wearing a cheap uniform from another restaurant. It took me a moment to recognize her. Hello, Greg, Alicia said quietly. She looked completely different. Gone was the polished, entitled woman I'd married. In her place stood someone who looked like she'd learned what real work felt like. You're looking for a job? I asked. And I need a second job. The diner where I work doesn't pay enough for me to make my monthly payments to Tony. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or false emotion. I found none. She looked genuinely humbled by her circumstances. I don't think that's a good idea, I said finally. Please, Greg. I know I don't deserve any favors from you, but I'm desperate. I'll work any shift, do any job. I just need the money. What happened to Dominic? Her face flushed with embarrassment. He left town about a month ago, found a new girlfriend with better financial prospects. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'm sorry, Alicia, but I can't hire you. It would be too complicated for everyone involved. She nodded, accepting the rejection with more grace than I'd expected. I understand. Thank you for considering it. She turned to leave, then stopped. Greg? I know this doesn't mean anything now, but I really am sorry for all of it. I know you are. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I thought about it for a moment. Maybe someday. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I know, I wanted you to know that I understand what I lost. I understand that I threw away the best thing in my life for something that was never real. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the strange turns life takes. A year ago, I'd been a naive husband who trusted his wife completely. Today, I was a divorced man who'd learned that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of betraying you. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to stand up for myself, smart enough to outmaneuver people who thought they could use me, and resilient enough to build a new life from the ashes of my old one. 6 months later, I sold the restaurant for a substantial profit and used the money to start a consulting business helping other small business owners protect themselves from financial fraud. It turned out there was a significant market for that kind of expertise. I never saw Alicia again, though I heard through mutual friends that she eventually paid off her debt to Tony Marconi and moved to another state to start over. I hoped she'd learned from her mistakes, but I no longer cared enough to find out. As for Dominic, he sent me a letter about a year after everything ended. In it, he apologized again and thanked me for showing him what real integrity looked like. He'd gotten married to a woman his own age and was working as a fitness instructor at a rehabilitation center, helping people recover from injuries and addiction. The letter ended with a line that stuck with me. You taught me that being a man isn't about how much you can bench press or how many women you can charm. It's about taking responsibility for your actions and treating people with respect. I kept that letter in my desk drawer as a reminder that even in the worst situations, sometimes people can learn and grow. But the most important lesson I learned was about myself. I'd spent 20 years of my marriage trying to be the perfect husband, accommodating Alicia's every whim, and ignoring the warning signs that she was taking advantage of my generosity. Never again. Now, when people try to manipulate me or take advantage of my good nature, I remember the taste of betrayal and the sound of my wife laughing about my stupidity while she stole my money. And I smile, because I know something they don't. I'm not the same naive man I used to be. I'm someone who's been tested by fire and emerged stronger, smarter, and completely unwilling to be anyone's victim ever again. That knowledge is worth more than any amount of money Alicia could have stolen.